They say the customer is always right. But what happens when a billion-dollar corporation doesn't just get it wrong, but does so with smug disdain? What happens when a gate agent's cruel laughter at a 16-year-old girl's expense isn't just an isolated incident, but a symptom of a sickness rotting a company from the inside out? You're about to hear the story of Maya Monroe, a young black teenager who was publicly humiliated by airline staff for her backpack. But this isn't just a story about discrimination. It's about what happened next. It's about a family that didn't just file a complaint or ask for an apology. They decided to issue the ultimate correction. They didn't just want to fire the staff. They wanted to buy the entire airline. The air in Terminal C of Chicago O'Hare was a familiar soup of anxiety and recycled oxygen. It was the frantic liminal space where time zones bled into one another, and the collective mood was a low-grade hum of impatience. For 16-year-old Maya Monroe, it was just the final hurdle before a week of sun-drenched freedom in Miami with her cousins. She clutched the strap of her backpack, a comforting weight against her shoulder. It wasn't just any backpack. It was a kaleidoscope of color and creation, a project she'd poured her soul into for the better part of a year. The main body was crafted from durable upcycled sailcloth, but its surface was a canvas of intricate hand-stitched patches. There was a solar system with planets made of iridescent thread, a roaring lion whose mane was a sunburst of golden embroidery, and a tiny functioning LED circuit that made a constellation of her own design gently pulse with light. It was her art, her engineering project, and her personal statement all rolled into one. It was unabashedly unique, a beacon of individuality in a world that often pushed for conformity. Her boarding group was called, and she shuffled forward in the line for Summit Airlines Flight 142. The gate agent, a woman whose name tag read Brenda, watched the approaching passengers with an expression of profound boredom. She had a tight perm that seemed lacquered in place, and eyes that scanned boarding passes with the enthusiasm of a tax auditor. When Maya reached the counter, she offered a polite smile and held out her phone with the digital pass. Brenda's eyes flickered from the phone screen, not to Maya's face, but to the backpack slung over her shoulder. A slow, condescending smirk crept across her lips. "Well, look what we have here," Brenda said, her voice carrying across the quiet lull in the boarding announcements. She didn't lower her voice. If anything, she seemed to play to the small audience of waiting passengers. "That's quite the bag you've got there, honey." Maya's smile faltered. "Thank you. I made it." The smirk widened into a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't say." She leaned over the counter slightly, pointing a perfectly manicured but predatory-looking fingernail toward the LED constellation. "Is that thing gonna interfere with the plane's navigation? Or are you just trying to signal your home planet?" A snicker rippled through the people closest to the desk. Heat rushed to Maya's cheeks. She was used to people asking about the backpack, usually with curiosity or admiration. This was different. This was mockery, sharp and public. "It's just a low-power LED circuit." Maya explained, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "It's completely safe. The battery is—" Brenda waved a dismissive hand, cutting her off. "Save the science fair speech. We have rules about carry-on items. They need to be professional." She looked pointedly from the vibrant backpack to the plain black roller bags of the businessmen behind Maya. "This looks like something you'd win at a carnival." The humiliation was a physical thing, now a cold knot tightening in Maya's stomach. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some amused, some pitying, all of them making her feel like an insect under a microscope. It's my personal item. It fits the size requirements, Maya insisted, trying to keep her voice steady. It's not about the size, it's about the appropriateness of it, Brenda said, clearly enjoying herself. She turned to her colleague at the adjacent desk. Gary, come get a load of this. Gary Franklin was a man who seemed to have been poured into a uniform that was a size too small. He lumbered over a permanent scowl etched on his face. He glanced at the backpack, then at Maya, and let out a short, barking laugh. Whoa there. What is that, a disco ball? Gary boomed. You know, young lady, this is Summit Airlines, not a music festival. We have a certain image to maintain, an image of what the words were out of Maya's mouth before she could stop them. They were quiet, but laced with a sudden sharp anger. Brenda's manufactured smile vanished, replaced by a flash of irritation. Excuse me, I asked what image you're trying to maintain. Maya repeated, lifting her chin. One where you make fun of a 16-year-old girl's personal belongings in front of an entire gate. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The faint snickering died. A few passengers looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. Gary's scowl deepened. Now you watch your tone, young lady, he warned, stepping closer to the counter, using his bulk as a form of intimidation. You're holding up the line. That bag is a distraction. It's unprofessional and frankly ridiculous. It probably won't even fit under the seat properly. It will, Maya stated flatly. I measured it. I'll be the judge of that, Brenda snapped. I'm not sure we can let you on the plane with that thing. It's a potential safety hazard. A safety hazard? Maya was incredulous. It's a backpack. A cloth backpack. It has wires in it, Gary interjected, pointing a thick finger. For all we know, it could be anything. The accusation, absurd as it was, hung in the air. The subtext was ugly and unmistakable. It wasn't just about the backpack anymore. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the airport's air conditioning. She was being profiled, stereotyped, and publicly shamed. Are you serious? Maya's voice trembled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You're suggesting my sewing project is a threat? A man in a sharp suit behind her finally spoke up. For crying out loud, just let the kid on the plane. It's a backpack. My briefcase has more electronics in it than that. Brenda shot him a venomous look before turning her attention back to Maya. Your opinion was not requested, sir. We have procedures. She squinted at Maya's boarding pass. Look, Monroe, either you check the bag, or you're not getting on the flight. Your choice. Checking the bag wasn't an option. It was delicate. The circuitry was protected, but not designed for the brutish handling of baggage claim. More than that, it was the principle. She had done nothing wrong. Tears of frustration pricked at her eyes, and she hated herself for it. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She took a deep, shaky breath. I would like to speak to a corporate representative, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of the formality she'd heard her parents use. Gary laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. You're looking at him. I'm the supervisor, and I'm telling you that bag goes in the cargo hold, or you can find another way to Miami. Defeated, humiliated, and shaking with anger, Maya felt her shoulders slump. She knew it was a battle she couldn't win. Not here. Not now. The glint of triumph in Brenda's eyes was the final insult. With trembling fingers, she carefully detached the small battery pack from the LED circuit, zipped it into her pocket, and let them tag her creation. As she watched them toss it onto the baggage conveyor with a careless thud, She felt as if they were tossing a piece of her away with it. Walking down the jet bridge, her face burning, she pulled out her phone. She didn't text her cousins to say she was on her way. She opened the family group chat and typed a single loaded sentence. "You will not believe what just happened to me at the Summit Airlines gate." Miles away in a quiet, sunlit home office overlooking Lake Michigan. Her father, David Monroe, read the message. His fingers, which had been dancing over a keyboard, designing the architecture for a revolutionary new AI platform, went still. Across the city, in a sleek downtown boardroom, her mother, Dr. Evelyn Reed, was in the middle of negotiating a 9-figure biotech deal. Her phone buzzed discreetly on the table. She glanced at the screen, and the warm, commanding smile she was giving the investors across the table froze, becoming something infinitely colder and harder. The incident at Gate B34 wasn't over. It had just begun. The Monroe home in Kenilworth was a testament to modern elegance and quiet power. It was less a mansion and more a living sculpture of glass, steel, and warm mahogany, designed to blend seamlessly with the shoreline of Lake Michigan. It was a house built not by old money, but by new ideas. David Monroe was a legend in the world of software engineering, a quiet, unassuming man who had architected the digital backbone of the global financial system in his 20s, and had since moved on to artificial intelligence, creating patents that were now embedded in nearly every smart device on the planet. He was a thinker, a builder, a man who saw the world in systems and logic. His wife, Dr. Evelyn Reed, was his perfect complement. A former cardiothoracic surgeon, she had pivoted from saving lives one at a time to transforming entire industries. She ran a venture capital firm with a reputation for spotting genius and a ruthlessness for cutting out mediocrity. She saw the world in terms of strategy leverage and human potential. Together they were a formidable force, their combined intellect and influence, a well-guarded secret outside of the highest echelons of tech and finance. They had raised their daughter Maya to be independent, creative, and fiercely intelligent. They nurtured her passions for both art and science, seeing no contradiction between the two. The backpack was a perfect embodiment of the child they had raised, innovative, beautiful, and unapologetically herself. The phone call from Maya, her voice thick with barely suppressed tears as she recounted the story from the cramped airplane seat, had been a spark falling on dry tinder. By the time her flight landed in Miami, a storm was brewing in Chicago. David had cancelled his afternoon meetings. Evelyn had closed her multi-million-dollar deal with a brisk final handshake and was home within the hour. They sat in the minimalist living room, the vast expanse of the lake, a calm blue backdrop to their brewing fury. The official complaint had already been filed online, a sterile form that felt wholly inadequate to capture the venom of the encounter. "A disco ball," David repeated, his voice dangerously low. He stared out at the water, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. They called her art a disco ball, and suggested it was a bomb. David Evelyn added, her voice sharp as surgical steel. She was pacing a coiled spring of energy. "Let's not forget that part. The casual racist insinuation that a black girl with wires in her bag is a threat, in front of a crowd. They didn't just mock her. They endangered her." "And Summit's initial response?" David gestured to the tablet on the coffee table. It displayed the email that had arrived just minutes before. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology. "Dear Ms. Monroe, thank you for reaching out to Summit Airlines. We have received your feedback regarding your experience at O'Hare International Airport. We take all customer concerns seriously and will be looking into the matter. Our staff is trained to adhere to all FAA and TSA security protocols to ensure the safety of all our passengers. We apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused, and as a gesture of goodwill, we have attached a $150 voucher for your next flight with Summit. Evelyn let out a short, incredulous laugh. Inconvenience. They think this was an inconvenience and a voucher. They humiliate our child, imply she's a terrorist, and think they can buy our silence for the price of a one-way ticket to Cleveland. It's a systemic problem, David said, turning from the window. His quiet demeanor was gone, replaced by the intense focus he usually reserved for cracking an impossible line of code. This wasn't just two bad employees. The email proves it. This is the corporate culture. Brush it off, smooth it over, assume the customer is either lying or will be pacified by a pittance. They have a system for handling this, which means it happens often. So what's the move? David Evelyn stopped pacing and looked at him. This was how they worked. She was the strategist. He was the architect. We sue them. We find the best discrimination lawyers in the country. We drag Brenda Gary and the whole damn airline through a public discovery process that will be exquisitely painful for them. David shook his head slowly. A lawsuit will take years. It'll be draining for Maya, forcing her to relive it over and over in depositions. And in the end, what do we get? A settlement. Some money we don't need, and a confidential agreement that ensures nothing really changes. They'll issue a press release about renewed commitment to diversity, fire the two low-level employees, and the system that produced them will remain intact. The CEO, Richard Sterling, will continue getting his multi-million-dollar bonus. He was right. A lawsuit was a conventional weapon, and this felt like a situation that demanded an unconventional response. Evelyn sat down opposite him, her mind racing. So we go public. A media campaign. We use our connections. Get the story on every major network. Make Summit Airlines a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. Public shaming can be a powerful motivator for corporate change. It can. David agreed. But it's also unpredictable. The narrative can get twisted. They'll dig into our lives trying to discredit us. And again it puts Maya at the center of a media storm. I don't want her to become a symbol. I want her to have justice. He paused, his eyes taking on a distant, calculating look. Justice requires leverage. True, undeniable leverage. He fell silent for a long moment, the only sound the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. Evelyn watched him, knowing his mind was working on a different level, connecting dots she couldn't see yet. "What are you thinking, David?" she finally asked. He picked up the tablet again, but this time he swiped away the email and opened a financial news terminal. His fingers flew across the screen, pulling up stock charts, market caps, and shareholder reports for Summit Airlines Group, Inc. SAG. Richard Sterling. David said softly. CEO since 2015. Under his leadership, the stock has been stagnant. Profit margins are thin. They're heavily leveraged with significant debt from a recent fleet upgrade that went over budget. They're vulnerable. Evelyn felt a slow, dawning realization. A thrill that was equal parts audacious and terrifying. Vulnerable to what David looked up from the tablet, and for the first time that afternoon, a hint of a smile touched his lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found the one perfect, elegant solution to an infuriating problem. "You don't fix a broken system by suing it from the outside," he said. "You don't fix it by shouting at it. You fix it by taking control of it." He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was the current stock price of SAG and its total market capitalization. Their public float is around 70%. David continued, his voice now filled with a quiet, confident energy. The board and institutional investors hold the other 30. No single entity holds more than 8%. They're completely exposed to a hostile takeover. Evelyn stared at the numbers. Her mind, honed by years of assessing company valuations and strategic acquisitions, began to churn. The idea was insane. It was grandiose. It was the most dramatic, over-the-top, and frankly terrifying solution imaginable. And it was utterly breathtakingly perfect. "You want to buy the airline," she whispered, the words feeling surreal on her tongue. "Not just buy it," David corrected. "I don't want to be a passive investor. I don't want a seat on the board. I want control. We start a shell corporation tomorrow. We begin acquiring shares on the open market, quietly at first, through multiple brokers, to avoid detection. We can get up to 4.9% without filing a disclosure. While we're doing that, our team will do a deep dive. Find the disgruntled major shareholders who are tired of Sterling's poor performance. We'll make them an offer they can't refuse." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "We don't just ask for change, Evelyn. We buy the right to implement it. We buy the right to fire Richard Sterling. We buy the right to rewrite their entire employee handbook. We buy the right to walk into Gate B34 and personally terminate the employment of Brenda and Gary. We turn their condescending, dismissive $150 travel voucher into the most expensive mistake their company has ever made. The sheer magnificent audacity of it hung in the air. A lawsuit was a battle. This was a war. It was a move so bold, so far outside the normal rules of engagement, that no one would ever see it coming. Evelyn thought of Maya, of the trembling anger in her voice, of the casual cruelty she had endured. She thought of the smug, dismissive faces of Brenda and Gary, secure in their petty authority. She thought of the insulting, tone-deaf email from a corporation that believed it was untouchable. A slow, fierce smile spread across her own face, mirroring her husband's. The strategist had found her architect's plan. "All right, Dr. Evelyn Reed," said her voice, dropping into the calm, decisive tone she used when closing a deal. "Let's buy an airline." The first phase of the operation was executed with the silent precision of a submarine. David and Evelyn created a new limited liability company, Monroe Equity Partners, a name so bland and generic it was designed to be overlooked. Through a network of trusted brokers in New York, London, and Zurich, Monroe Equity began to drink from the open tap of Summit Airlines stock. Every transaction was kept just below the threshold that would trigger alarms 1,000 small bites instead of one large one. To the market, it was just noise, random institutional trading hedge funds, rebalancing nothing to indicate a coordinated assault. While David orchestrated the financial ghost in the machine, Evelyn focused on the human element. Her team of analysts, the sharpest minds from her VC firm, began mapping the constellation of Summit's major shareholders. They weren't just looking at the big investment firms like BlackRock or Vanguard. They were digging deeper into the second-tier pension funds, the smaller family offices, the wealthy individuals who had been holding the stagnant stock for years, growing ever more frustrated with Richard Sterling's leadership. Richard Sterling, CEO of Summit Airlines, was oblivious. He was a man coasting on the inertia of a legacy brand. He was a creature of country clubs and quarterly earnings calls, a master of corporate platitudes who believed culture was something you printed on posters for the break room. His office on the top floor of Summit Tower in downtown Atlanta was a shrine to his own ego, filled with silver airplane models and photos of him shaking hands with politicians. His first inkling that something was amiss came not from his trading floor, but from a junior analyst in investor relations named Tim. Tim was a nervous young man with glasses that were perpetually sliding down his nose, and his job was to monitor stock movement. Mr. Sterling. Tim began hovering nervously in the doorway of the CEO's vast office. "It's probably nothing, sir, but we've seen a significant uptick in trading volume over the last 10 days. No big blocks, but the aggregate is substantial. Over 4% of the public float has changed hands." Sterling waved a dismissive hand, not looking up from a report on fuel hedging. "It's the funds, Tim. End of the quarter rebalancing. Don't get your tie in a knot. Let me know when someone actually files a 13D. A 13D filing was the SEC requirement when an entity acquired more than 5% of a company's stock, the official signal of a potential activist investor or takeover bid. Until then, Sterling wasn't concerned, but the quiet accumulation continued. By the time Monroe Equity Partners reached the 4.9% threshold, Evelyn's team had identified their first target, a man named Arthur Vance. Vance was a retired railroad executive in his late 70s who held a 3.5% stake in Summit, a remnant from a long-forgotten merger. He was a cantankerous, old-school industrialist who had been writing letters to Sterling and the board for years, complaining about declining customer service, poor on-time performance, and the CEO's exorbitant salary. He was, in Evelyn's parlance, a motivated seller. Evelyn flew to Palm Beach and met him not in a boardroom, but on the patio of his sprawling old-world estate. She didn't start with numbers. She started with a story. "Mr. Vance," she began after the pleasantries were exchanged. "I'm here because I believe Summit Airlines is a great American brand that has lost its way. It's a company that has forgotten that its most valuable asset isn't its fleet of airplanes, but its relationship with its customers." She then told him a carefully anonymized version of Maya's story. She didn't name her daughter, but she painted a vivid picture of a young girl, a creative spark, and the casual cruelty she faced from employees who felt empowered by a culture of indifference. Vance, a man with 3 granddaughters of his own, listened intently, his bushy white eyebrows knitting together in a scowl. "That's the problem right there," he grumbled when she finished. "No pride, no discipline. Sterling runs that airline like it's his personal club, not a public service. He's all smiles for Wall Street and sneers for Main Street." "My partners and I believe it's time for a change in leadership," Evelyn said smoothly. "We are prepared to make you an offer for your entire stake, 20% above the current market price." Vance's eyes, watery with age, sharpened. It was a generous offer, a clean exit from an investment that had been a source of nothing but aggravation. But it wasn't just about the money. "Who are your partners?" he asked, his gaze piercing. "A private family office that values discretion," Evelyn replied, "and one that believes in a simple principle: you treat every single person from a first-class passenger to a teenager with a handmade backpack with dignity and respect. We want to restore that pride you spoke of." The old man was silent for a long moment, studying her. He saw not just a shrewd negotiator, but a woman with conviction. "You get me a signed contract by 5 p.m. Vance said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "And you'll have my shares and my proxy for the next board meeting. It's time to give Richard Sterling a wake-up call." With Vance's 3.5%, Monroe Equity now controlled 8.4% of Summit Airlines. The next day, as legally required, they filed the 13D. The document landed on Richard Sterling's desk like a grenade. Monroe Equity Partners. He snarled, throwing the filing down. Who the hell are Monroe Equity Partners? Get me everything you can on them. Now. The problem was there was almost nothing to find. The firm was a black box, a Delaware LLC, with a registered agent and no public face. The panic in Summit Tower was palpable. Wall Street abhors a mystery and a mysterious entity that had just bought a significant stake in your company and wooed away one of your most vocal critics was a nightmare. Sterling immediately went on the offensive. He convened a board meeting and hired the most aggressive defense advisors on Wall Street. He painted Monroe Equity as corporate raiders, vultures who would buy the company loaded with debt and sell it for parts. His PR team began leaking stories to friendly journalists, painting a narrative of an unknown hostile force threatening a venerable American company and its thousands of employees. The first public shot was an article in the Wall Street Journal headlined, "Shadowy Firm Targets, Summit, Airlines Threatening Jobs and Stability." David and Evelyn read the article in their Chicago office, a temporary space they'd leased for the operation. "Shadowy firm," David said with a dry chuckle. "He's painting us as the villains. Of course he is." Evelyn countered, her eyes scanning the article. "It's the classic defense. FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. He's trying to scare other shareholders into sticking with him. It's our move." It was time to step out of the shadows, but not all the way. Evelyn scheduled a call with one of the most respected financial reporters in the business, a woman named Sarah Jenkins from Bloomberg. She gave Jenkins an exclusive, but a carefully controlled one. She revealed that Monroe Equity was a family office, not a private equity fund, and that its intentions were not to dismantle the company, but to reform it. "We are long-term investors," Evelyn told Jenkins, her voice calm and authoritative. "We see tremendous untapped potential in Summit Airlines, but we believe that potential can only be unlocked through a fundamental shift in corporate culture, starting at the very top. The current leadership has fostered an environment of complacency and disrespect that is damaging to the brand and ultimately to shareholder value." The Bloomberg article, "Family Office Behind Summit, Bid Sites, Cultural Rot, Vows Reform," was a precision strike. It reframed the narrative from a hostile takeover to a necessary intervention. It was a message aimed directly at the other shareholders. We're not here to destroy value. We're here to create it. The war was now out in the open. Sterling, enraged, doubled down. He announced a poison pill defense, a shareholder rights plan designed to make a hostile takeover prohibitively expensive. It was a declaration of total war. He had no idea he was fighting ghosts. He had no idea the battle wasn't just about stock prices and board seats. He had no idea that his true enemy wasn't a faceless firm, but a 16-year-old girl's memory of being mocked at gate B34 and the two brilliant, relentless parents who would burn a kingdom to the ground to avenge her. The pieces were moving on the board. The quiet accumulation had become a public war, and the Monroe family, armed with billions of dollars and a righteous fury, was just getting started. With the takeover battle now public, the due diligence phase began in earnest. As a major shareholder pushing for change, Monroe Equity Partners had the right to access certain non-public corporate information. Richard Sterling's legal team fought them at every turn, burying them in mountains of irrelevant data and redacting documents so heavily they looked like classified government secrets. But David and Evelyn had hired the best forensic accountants and data analysts in the business. For them, sorting through digital chaff was child's play. David himself designed the algorithms to sift through the terabytes of data they were receiving from Summit. He wasn't just looking for financial irregularities. He was looking for patterns of behavior, searching for the digital fingerprints of the cultural rot Evelyn had spoken of. What they began to uncover was worse than they had imagined. The first major discovery came from the customer relations database. The official sanitized complaints were just the tip of the iceberg. Buried in the system were thousands of Level 1 incident reports, complaints that were never escalated, handled at the local level, and closed out with a boilerplate apology or a token voucher. David's algorithms sorted and cross-referenced the reports, flagging keywords: discrimination, humiliation, mockery, racist profiled, disrespectful. The results painted a sickening picture. Maya's story wasn't an anomaly. It was the template. There was the story of a Sikh man, a respected surgeon who was repeatedly pulled aside and questioned because of his turban. The story of a young mother with 2 children who was berated by a flight attendant for asking for help with her bags. There were hundreds of reports from black and brown passengers detailing extra security screenings for no reason, dismissive attitudes from staff, and a pervasive sense of being treated as second-class citizens. The names of the offending employees appeared again and again. Brenda Walsh and Gary Franklin from O'Hare were frequent flyers in the complaint system, with a documented history of rudeness and prejudice going back years. They knew Evelyn said her voice a low growl as she read a summary report. Sterling's entire executive team knew. The patterns are undeniable. They didn't see it as a problem to be solved. They saw it as a cost of doing business to be managed. It's cheaper to send a $150 voucher than to properly train and discipline your staff. David added his disgust, palpable. This is the data that proves our case. This isn't just about Maya. This is about a decade of systemic abuse under Sterling's watch. But the cultural rot was intertwined with deep financial mismanagement. The forensic accountants discovered that the recent fleet upgrade, the one that had loaded the company with debt, was a disaster of cronyism. Sterling had pushed the company to purchase a new model of aircraft from a manufacturer where his old college roommate was a senior VP of sales. The planes were less fuel efficient than their competitors' models and were riddled with maintenance issues that were costing the airline millions in delays and repairs. The contract was a sweetheart deal for the manufacturer. Summit was locked into an expensive long-term service agreement, and Sterling had received a performance bonus of over $5 million the year the deal was signed. This is more than just bad judgment, Evelyn said, circling the bonus payment on a printout. This smells like a kickback. The most damning piece of evidence, however, was discovered by accident. An analyst on their team was combing through internal HR communications emails, memos, chat logs. They were looking for evidence of how discrimination complaints were handled. They found it, but they also found something else, a hidden cost-cutting initiative codenamed Project Sparrow. Project Sparrow was Sterling's secret plan to boost profit margins. It involved systematically reducing the budget for non-essential maintenance checks, using third-party replacement parts that weren't certified by the original manufacturer, and extending the service hours of older planes beyond recommended safety guidelines. It was a ticking time bomb. While there had been no major incidents yet, the internal risk assessments which Sterling had personally ordered, buried, showed a terrifying increase in the probability of a catastrophic mechanical failure. He was gambling with passengers' lives to make his quarterly numbers look better. David and Evelyn sat in silence for a full minute after the Project Sparrow memo was put in front of them. The fight was no longer about avenging their daughter's humiliation. It had become a moral crusade. "He can't be allowed to run this company for one more day," David said, his voice cold as ice. "This is criminally negligent." They now had the ultimate weapon. They could leak the Project Sparrow documents. The resulting scandal would destroy Sterling Tank, the stock, and likely trigger a federal investigation that would cripple the airline. It was the nuclear option. "We can't," Evelyn said, immediately anticipating his thought. "If we leak this, the stock collapses. The company might not survive. Our investment would be worthless, and thousands of innocent employees, the pilots, the flight attendants, the mechanics who are probably fighting this nonsense from the inside, would lose their jobs. We didn't start this to burn the whole thing to the ground." "So what do we do?" David asked. "We're in a proxy fight. Sterling still controls the board. They'll circle the wagons and try to bury this." Evelyn's mind was already formulating a new strategy. "We don't go public with it. We go private. Directly to the people who matter." Her team identified the 3 most influential members of Summit's board of directors, excluding Sterling. There was a retired 4-star general, a former Secretary of Transportation, and a woman named Eleanor Vance, the daughter of Arthur Vance, the man who had sold them their first major block of shares. She had inherited her father's seat and his fiery disposition. Evelyn arranged a secret meeting in a private suite at the Peninsula Chicago. No lawyers, no advisors. Just her, David, and the 3 board members. The atmosphere was tense. The board members were loyal to Sterling, or at least to the stability he represented. They saw the Monroes as hostile opportunists. Evelyn didn't waste time. "We're not here to talk about stock prices or leadership styles," she began. "We're here to talk about safety." For the next hour, she and David laid out their findings with cold, irrefutable precision. They presented the data on the customer complaints, the evidence of financial malfeasance in the fleet acquisition, and finally they presented the Project Sparrow memos. They watched the faces of the 3 board members change from skepticism to shock, and then to horror. The retired general, a man who had sent men into battle, grew pale. The former transportation secretary, who understood the intricacies of FAA regulations, began quietly cursing under his breath. Eleanor Vance was furious. "My father told me Sterling was a fool," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "He didn't tell me he was a monster. He's been lying to us, to all of us. This information in our hands could destroy the company," David said quietly. "But we have no desire to do that. We believe in this airline. We believe in its people. But it needs to be saved from its leader." "What do you want?" the general asked, his voice gravelly. "We want the poison pill rescinded," Evelyn stated. "We want the board to publicly recommend our tender offer to the shareholders. And we want Richard Sterling's immediate resignation. You will install a temporary CEO from within your ranks, and you will facilitate a smooth and orderly transition of control to us. In return, this information," she tapped the folder containing the Project Sparrow documents, "never sees the light of day. We will handle the safety issues internally quietly and effectively, without creating a public panic." It was checkmate. They were offering the board a way out, a chance to be heroes who saved the company from a corrupt CEO, rather than fools who enabled him. The 3 board members looked at each other. The decision was already made. Their loyalty to Sterling had evaporated in the face of such damning evidence. Their duty now was to the airline itself. The general nodded slowly. "You'll have your vote." The war for Summit Airlines was about to end. The Monroes hadn't just outmaneuvered Richard Sterling. They had exposed him. And they had done it not by being corporate raiders, but by being something he could never understand people who actually cared. The emergency board meeting was held 2 days later via a secure video conference. Richard Sterling joined the call with an air of belligerent confidence. He believed his poison pill was impenetrable and that his hand-picked board would fall in line as they always had. He planned to use the meeting to formally condemn Monroe Equity Partners and rally his troops. He was expecting a fight. He got an execution. The retired general spoke first, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Richard, we have reviewed the information provided by Monroe Equity Partners. We have also conducted our own internal verification. We find the evidence compelling." Sterling's confident smirk faltered. "What evidence? Its lies and distortions from corporate raiders trying to steal the company. Is Project Sparrow a lie?" Richard Eleanor Vance cut in her tone like ice. The color drained from Sterling's face. He looked from face to face on the screen, seeing not the familiar compliant allies he expected, but the cold, hard stares of judges. The trap had been sprung, and he was caught in it. The vote was a mere formality. One by one, they voted to rescind the poison pill. They voted to recommend the Monroe tender offer. And finally, they called for his immediate resignation. Sterling sputtered, threatened, and blustered, but his power was gone. By the end of the hour-long call, he was no longer the CEO of Summit Airlines. His reign, built on ego, greed, and indifference, had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, merciless click of a leave meeting button. With the board's endorsement, the Monroe tender offer was a guaranteed success. Within a week, Monroe Equity Partners had acquired 51.7% of the voting shares of Summit Airlines. The ghosts in the machine had become the owners. The day the acquisition was finalized, David Evelyn and Maya Monroe walked into the lobby of Summit Tower in Atlanta. The building itself felt like a relic, all dark wood and polished brass, a monument to an outdated mode of thinking. Their first stop was the top floor. The former office of Richard Sterling was being cleared out. His silver airplane models and self-congratulatory photos were being packed into cardboard boxes. David and Evelyn had no intention of occupying the space. They had already designated it as a future employee lounge and innovation lab. Their first official act was to appoint an interim CEO, a well-respected veteran of the airline industry, known for his focus on safety and operations. Their second act was to draft a company-wide memo. It was sent to every employee from the pilots and mechanics to the baggage handlers and gate agents. It announced the change in ownership and leadership. But it was the content that was revolutionary. It spoke of a new covenant with both customers and employees. It promised a top-to-bottom review of safety procedures, a renewed investment in training and equipment, and the implementation of a new robust system for handling customer and employee complaints, a system that prioritized resolution and accountability over dismissal. It announced an immediate company-wide bonus paid for by the cancellation of the executive bonus pool as a gesture of faith in the workforce. And it contained one very specific paragraph. We believe that dignity and respect are not optional. They are the bedrock of our business. Any employee at any level who treats a customer or a colleague with disrespect, prejudice, or contempt is in violation of the core principles of the new Summit Airlines. There will be no exceptions. There will be zero tolerance. The memo sent shockwaves through the company. Years of cynicism and distrust had been hardwired into the culture. Some were skeptical, but for many, it felt like a window had been opened in a sealed tomb. For their final act of the day, David and Evelyn made a phone call. They patched in the station manager at O'Hare International Airport. "We have the HR files for 2 of your gate agents," Evelyn said, her voice calm and businesslike. "Brenda Walsh and Gary Franklin. I see they are both scheduled to work tomorrow morning." "Yes, ma'am," the station manager replied, his voice laced with nervousness. He had read the memo. "Please inform them that upon their arrival they are to report to the HR office, not to their assigned gate," David instructed. "Their employment with Summit Airlines is terminated effective immediately. Their final paychecks are being processed. Security is to escort them from the property. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "Perfectly." There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic scene at the gate. David and Evelyn felt no need for it. They weren't acting out of a need for personal vengeance anymore. This wasn't about shouting at the people who had hurt their daughter. It was about surgically removing a cancer. Walsh and Franklin weren't special. They were merely the most visible symptoms of the disease they had been hired to cure. Their dismissal was a simple, necessary administrative act, the first step in a long process of rebuilding. That evening, the 3 of them were in a hotel suite overlooking the city. Maya had been quiet for most of the day, watching her parents with a look of awe. She had sent a text, and it had set in motion a corporate earthquake. "Did you really fire them?" she asked softly. "We did," Evelyn confirmed. Maya nodded, processing it. She didn't look triumphant or happy. She looked thoughtful. "Does this fix it?" David sat next to her. "Firing 2 people doesn't fix a broken culture, sweetheart. But it's a start. It sends a message that the old way of doing things is over. The real work, the hard work, starts tomorrow." He was right. They hadn't just bought an airline to get revenge. They had bought it because, in the sterile, dismissive response to their daughter's pain, they saw a reflection of a deeper problem, a company that had lost its humanity. And the Monroes, the builder, and the strategist had decided that if the system was broken, they would just have to buy it and build a new one. Their victory wasn't in the takeover, it was in the opportunity that came after. The reckoning was complete, but the reformation was just beginning. The first 6 months of the Monroe era at Summit Airlines were a whirlwind of radical systemic change. It was less a corporate restructuring and more a cultural revolution. The name Summit was officially retired, replaced by a new brand identity, Aura Airlines. The new logo was a stylized A that resembled both a bird's wing and a steady upward trending arrow. The old stuffy navy blue and red uniforms were replaced with modern, comfortable designs in charcoal grey and a warm, inviting sunrise orange. But the changes were far more than cosmetic. David Monroe, working with a team of the best software engineers, oversaw the creation of a new proprietary operational platform, codenamed Helios. It was a transparent, real-time system that connected everything from maintenance schedules and flight logistics to crew assignments and customer feedback. For the first time, everyone in the company had a clear view of how their role impacted the entire operation. Evelyn Reed, meanwhile, spearheaded the human element. She hired a new head of people and culture, a celebrated expert from the hospitality industry, and together they dismantled the old HR department, rebuilding it from the ground up. The infamous Level 1 complaint system was abolished. A new Aura Cares team was created, empowered to solve customer issues on the spot with meaningful solutions, not insulting vouchers. Training was completely overhauled. Every single employee from the executive suite to the tarmac was required to attend workshops on empathy, de-escalation, and cultural competency. The stories from the old complaint database, the Sikh surgeon, the struggling mother, became case studies. They were no longer data points to be dismissed, but human stories to be learned from. The karma for people like Brenda and Gary wasn't just that they were fired. The true karma was the world they left behind. Their former colleagues were now working for a company that actively trained them against the very behavior Brenda and Gary had seen as a perk of the job. The system that had protected and enabled them was gone, replaced by one that would have expelled them years ago. For Richard Sterling, the karma was more profound. He wasn't just unemployed, he was an industry pariah. The quiet internal disclosure of Project Sparrow had made him untouchable. No other major corporation would hire him. He lost his board seats, his club memberships, and his status. His greatest punishment was being forced to watch from the sidelines as the company he almost destroyed began to thrive without him. He saw news reports of Aura's rising customer satisfaction scores and record-breaking on-time performance, and was consumed by a bitter, impotent rage. The company's success was a daily public refutation of his entire career. The path for the Monroe family, however, was not without its own burdens. They had won the war, but now they bore the weight of the crown. The airline was no longer an abstract investment or a vehicle for justice. It was a living, breathing entity of 50,000 employees and their families and millions of passengers who depended on them. There was a tense night when a software glitch in the new Helios platform grounded the entire West Coast fleet for 3 hours. David was on a conference call with his lead engineers until 4 a.m., methodically working the problem, the pressure of 1,000 angry passengers and millions in lost revenue squarely on his shoulders. There was the difficult decision Evelyn had to make to close an unprofitable maintenance base in a small town, a move that was financially necessary, but resulted in the loss of 200 jobs. She flew to the town herself, held a town hall with the affected employees, and her firm personally funded a retraining and placement program for every single one of them. It was the right thing to do, but the weight of the decision stayed with her. For Maya, the experience was transformative. She had been the catalyst, but she refused to be just a symbol. She spent the next summer interning at Aura, not in the executive offices, but rotating through different departments. She worked with the design team on new cabin interiors, with the data analysts on passing customer feedback, and even spent a week shadowing the ground crew at O'Hare. One afternoon, she was standing near her old Nemesis Gate B-34, watching the smooth, efficient boarding of a flight to Miami. A family was struggling with a stroller and too many bags. The new Aura Gate agent, a young man with a warm smile, immediately stepped out from behind the counter. "Here, let me help you with that," he said easily, lifting the stroller to help them get it down the jet bridge. It was a small act, a simple moment of human kindness. But it was everything. Maya pulled out her phone and sent a message to the family group chat. It wasn't a cry for help this time. It was a photo of the gate agent helping the family. Underneath, she wrote a single word: "It's working." In that moment, David and Evelyn knew the immense cost and effort had been worth it. They hadn't just bought an airline. They had inherited a massive, complex, and deeply flawed institution, and were slowly, painstakingly infusing it with their own values. The ultimate karma wasn't the punishment of the guilty, but the redemption of the whole. They had taken an act of ugliness and used it as the foundation to build something of value, and they hoped something with grace. The journey had started with a mocked backpack, a symbol of one girl's creative spirit. It had ended with the rebirth of a great company, a testament to her family's belief that some things, dignity, respect, and justice, are worth any price. The story of the Monroe family and Aura Airlines is a powerful modern-day fable about justice. But it's more than just a satisfying tale of the tables being turned. It's a testament to the idea that real change requires more than just outrage. It requires vision, strategy, and the courage to dismantle broken systems and build better ones in their place. They didn't just seek revenge, they sought reformation. They took a painful, humiliating experience and used it as fuel to create a positive force for thousands of employees and millions of customers. What do you think? Was this the ultimate act of karma or an extreme overreaction? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible true stories. Thank you for watching.